Consumerism is the life force that fuels several major economies around the world. It's the reason why companies have been able to grow to enormous sizes and sustain themselves and spread all over the globe. Consumerism is a term used to describe the effects of equating personal happiness with purchasing material possessions. Consumer culture describes a lifestyle that is hyper-focused on these purchases. And although it is often attributed to the capitalist economy of the United States, consumer culture is actually multicultural and non-geographical, as seen today in Tokyo, Singapore, Shanghai, Taipei, Tel Aviv, and Dubai, for example. But what if I told you that the consumer culture we live in not only makes populations less happy in general, but it was also a conscious effort made by business leaders to slowly shift the general population away from being thrifty and frugal-minded to becoming material-obsessed consumerists? You're watching Wealthy Buddha, and today we're diving deep into consumerist culture and how we all developed the unquenchable thirst for more stuff. Consumption is frequently seen as our primary role in society, but the notion of human beings as consumers didn't become commonplace in America until the 1920s. People have, of course, always consumed the necessities of life, food, shelter, clothing, and have always had to work to get them. But there was little economic motive for increased consumption among the mass of people before the 20th century. In the late 1800s, the United States was rapidly becoming more and more industrialized. Massive multi-story department stores began covering millions of acres of selling space, and retailing was already moving away from small shopkeepers to corporate giants who had access to investment bankers and produced their products on assembly lines powered by fossil fuels. However, these products were still primarily out of reach for most common people at the time, and were mainly sold to a restricted population of wealthy families and individuals. It wasn't until after the end of World War I in the early 1920s that the general population had been able to sustain themselves above meeting their basic needs. U.S. production was more than 12 times greater in 1920 than in 1860, while the population over the same period had increased by only a factor of 3, suggesting just how much additional wealth was theoretically available. Society was essentially at an impasse here. A steady-state economy capable of meeting the basic needs of all was certainly possible and within reach, but big businesses did not support this trajectory. The short depression of 1921 to 1922 led businessmen and economists in the United States to fear that the immense productive powers that were created over the previous century had grown sufficiently to provide basic security to the entire population, and had probably triggered a permanent crisis of overproduction. The prospect of further economic expansion was looking pretty bleak. Such fears were widespread in business circles during the 1920s, but at the same time, a consumer solution was slowly emerging. Frederick Allen, a popular historian at the time, wrote, "Business had learned as never before the importance of the ultimate consumer. Unless he could be persuaded to buy and buy lavishly, the whole stream of 6-cylinder cars, super heterodynes, cigarettes, rogue compacts, and electric ice boxes would be dammed up at its outlets." In his 1928 book Propaganda, Edward Bernays, one of the pioneers of the public relations industry, put it this way: "Mass production is profitable only if its rhythm can be maintained. That is, if it can continue to sell its product in steady or increasing quantity. Today, supply must actively seek to create its corresponding demand, and cannot wait until the public asks for its product. It must maintain constant touch through advertising and propaganda to assure itself the continuous demand which will alone make its costly plant profitable." Edward Caldrick, an economist who advised corporations on their management and industrial relations policies, called it the new economic gospel of consumption, in which workers could be educated in the new skills of consumption. It was an idea also put forward by the new consumption economists such as Hazel Kirk and Teresa McMahon, and eagerly embraced by many business leaders. New needs would be created, with advertising brought into play to augment and accelerate the process. People would be encouraged to give up thrift and to value goods over their free time. Kirk argued for ever-increasing aspirations. A high standard of living must be dynamic, a progressive standard, where envy of those just above oneself in the social order encouraged consumption and fueled economic growth. Consumption continued to expand in the United States throughout the 1920s, although it was of course reduced by the Great Depression of 1929. The fraction of U.S. households with electricity doubled between 1921 and 1929, from 35% to 68%, and a rapid increase of radios, vacuum cleaners, and refrigerators followed. Motor car registration rose from 8 million in 1920 to more than 28 million by 1929. This was also the time when timed payment arrangements began to emerge as a method for buying goods, leading consumer debt to rise to over 200% of the GDP at the time. Banks were engaged in reckless lending of all kinds, and the economy eventually collapsed, suddenly and catastrophically, in 1929 as a result. However, once World War II was over, consumer culture took off again throughout the developed world. Radio and later television were the perfect vehicles of persuasion through advertising, a practice that is still highly prevalent even to this day. We had officially abandoned the possibility of a society that works for all, where our working hours could be reduced and we could have free time to spend with our families and communities or engage in creative and educational pursuits, in favor of a consumerist culture fueled by the envy of our peers and the unending desire for more stuff, which was literally plugged into our minds through any means possible in order to sustain these massive businesses. Retail analyst Victor Lebow explained it this way in 1955. Our enormous productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction, in consumption. Despite all of this, some may still argue for the benefits of consumer culture, claiming that an increase in the material goods that one owns can lead to an overall increase in well-being. However, this doesn't seem to be the case either. Tim Kasser, a psychology professor at Knox College, spent over 25 years researching how the pursuit of material goods, such as wealth and status, over pro-social goals such as family and community, negatively impacts both individual and societal well-being. His research shows that a wide variety of different well-being outcomes are associated with materialistic values. Dozens of studies have shown that the more people prioritize materialism and consumerism, the less happy they are, the less satisfied they are with their lives, the less vital and energetic they feel, the less likely they are to experience pleasant emotions like contentment and joy, the more depressed and anxious they are, and the more likely they are to engage in the use of substances like cigarettes and alcohol. His studies also showed that people who focus on materialistic goals have shorter, more conflictual interpersonal relationships and score lower on measures of empathy and cooperation. Materialism, therefore, does not lead to happiness. It leads to misery. It's costly to individuals and to society. It contributes to divorce rates and the breakdown of families, and it facilitates loneliness and insecurity. We've been plunged into a materialistic society, the ultimate consumer culture, for many decades now, and yet the research is just now catching up as to just how detrimental this culture can be for us. It's certainly time we take a look at our own individual priorities and see how much they line up to or conflict with the greater good. Society can certainly begin to make changes on an individual level. So the next time you see yourself buying something you might not need, consider the implications of this action, as well as the psychological conditions that brought you to that point. You just might be able to break the cycle and begin your journey of contentment, which can open up unlimited opportunities when you use your money for more meaningful purposes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and from all of us here at Wealthy Buddha, thanks for watching.